Hi, so glad you could come by. Last week we discovered that so much time was lost when people weren't nice to each other. This is a great metaphor for what's going on now. You never know if you're going to get to see someone again, so please be kind and be safe out there. And if there's someone you haven't spoken to in a long time, don't be shy. Call them up. That's what cell phones are for. Too bad there was nothing like that in Angeli. But it wouldn't have helped Rovash because little brother couldn't answer the phone anyway. But here you are in real life. Give somebody a call today. Tell them how much you care, or even just that you think about them. I promise you, you won't regret it. My name is Karleigh Bond. This is Tales of Eldelórne, Book 1, Chapter 16, The Lion Heart. I cannot go now. Yet. The commander seemed to be just a rabbit at heart when it came to his little brother. I have been thinking. I do not want to hurt my brother any more than I already have. I'm afraid he would run away at the sight of me. It's been such a long time. I am even hairier than before. He rubbed his beard anxiously and thought to shave it off. My friend, Fionna countered, you are not going to scare him, and your face looks fine. She reached over and put her hand on his arm to stop his fidgeting. He quit dragging at his hairy face and looked at her like a fearful little boy. Believe me when I say this, I've known your brother's kindness, and I've seen his wrath. You would never be able to scare him, not any more. Fionna tried to assure the blubbering commander. Think on it some more, she sighed, tired of this debate. Fionna threw her hands up and decided to go outside to breathe some fresh air. God's never ending, Fionna sighed in exasperation once she was out of earshot. His stubborn behavior reminds me of the other one. They are so both alike, she grumbled under her breath as she rolled her eyes and took off walking to her favorite perch among the boulders on the edge of the cliff. It was an early spring morning, and the blossoms and buds were opening on the trees. The smell of green and flowers filled the air. Fionna let out a deep, pensive breath, remembering Ijlam's smile. It was here that Ijlam found her. He was walking up the lower road when he saw her from a great distance. She was shining like the red orange of the sunrise. He honed in on her like a moth to a flame. The sound of his heart beat louder in his chest with every footstep. Unable to endure separation from her any longer, he quickened his pace across the closing distance. Fionna's eyes narrowed. In her mind's eye, she saw a figure striding up the hillside. The pounding of her heartbeat felt loud in her ears as he drew closer. Time slowed, and a light breeze blew her long hair out away from her face as she turned around to look upon him. There in her mind shone his eyes, one blue and one golden brown. They were fixed on her. Fionna knew without a doubt that the traveler coming towards her was EJ. Her heart nearly burst to find him so near. As if to ask permission, EJ paused a few lengths away and just stared at her. He was suddenly afraid she would be angry and accuse him of not waiting for her and breaking his vow. Fionna could see his maleness had filled out by the muscular look of his sinewy arms and face, and his skin was tanned and healthy-looking. Fionna opened her arms to receive him, and he quickly flew into her embrace. "Anthon Ernananden," he said, his voice timbre lower and more beautiful than she remembered. It poured over her like warm honey. "You are my heart," she cried, echoing his words and losing all the strength in her legs. They both fell to the sandy loam, kissing with tears and love, and a wholeness that had been missing from them while apart. "I cannot take my eyes off you. I'm afraid I will wake and this will be only a dream," Ijlum whispered to her. "It is a dream that I choose not to wake from," she said, touching his cheek with her fingertips. "Hear me, beloved." EJ looked ardently into her eyes as he spoke. "I will not breathe again without the joy of you in all my days. Please tell me you will be forever mine as elven kin have been throughout all time. Betroth me, my love. My heart is at your mercy." He suffered heart-crushing anguish as he waited for her answer. Fionna could see he was dead serious in his proposal. She never broke his gaze as she replied most solemnly, "You are all my heart, my most beloved one. Your voice has been with me since I left you behind. I yearned so much to see you here by my side. I do desire to be your betrothed and to love you throughout all times. Then now, as we have both spoken from our hearts, so our bond will be." EJ smiled, and Fionna could feel his love pour into her heart as if it never beat on its own before that moment. "We are together then as elvenkin?" Fi asked. "Yes, my love," EJ spoke softly. She leaned over and kissed him harder than he expected, accidentally knocking them both over. They rolled in each other's embrace again, laughing in sheer joy. Ijlum smiled, his great big sparkling smile. Fionna broke into more tears, as for the first time she let the whole force of it melt her in his arms. "It has been too long," he said, shaking his head. He could only gaze lovingly at her. The couple sitting on the ground did not see the giant lion stalking in the shadow of the cliffside forest. "The sun is high now. Let me take you to where I work so you could get some breakfast. Then I will tell you all that has happened. And there's someone you need to see," Fionna excitedly said, thinking she could not wait to see the look on Ro's face when they walked through the door. They kissed deeply again. "I do not think I can move yet," Ijlum said. "So stunned am I by my Fionna's beauty." He gave her his cute face. "If you do not stop doing that, we'll die of starvation out here." Fionna giggled, joking around and poking her finger at his arm. A blood-curdling roar and the sound of brush breaking right next to them took her breath away and brought them both to shocked attention. EJ leapt up off the ground and drew both his short swords, knowing he had no time to arm his bow. Whatever the monster was, it was bearing down on them fast. Fionna screamed out of sheer terror as the head of the lion was upon them. It was as big as the side of a building, with teeth and claws bared. Fionna had grabbed her staff off the ground and was already shooting flames into the lion's face, slowing it down, giving Aeglum enough time. EJ dodged left and slashed at the beast. He had never met with a brute such as this before. He looked for any weakness as he lunged forward. One of his swords connected across the huge arm, and the other jabbed between the ribs. In one quick motion, EJ was on top of the monster, drilling down hard with fang-like twin blades. But the skull was too thick. EJ's swords glanced off as if the animal were made of stone. Realizing his mistake too late, he lost his balance. The lion pounced to where its prey was a second before, and Fionna blasted more flames into its backside. The giant spinning cat threw EJ flailing down over the cliff's edge. Fionna screamed in disbelief, hoping she had not just witnessed him falling to his death. She ran to the side, where he disappeared. Stumbling, Fionna went down hard, near the claws of the scrambling beast. The stench of its hot, panting breath nearly made her faint as she turned and saw it so near. It was preparing to take her as its next meal. Book 1 of Tales of Eldelórne can be found on Amazon.com right now. The realm of Angeli is a land full of goblins and humans, wizards and elves. If you're enjoying the podcast, please give us a 5-star rating if you can, and tell your friends so that they listen to the podcast too. With enough listeners, I can get some sponsorships and maybe not be a starving artist anymore. Anyway, on with the show. Having heard Fiona's first screams all the way back to the fort, Rovash and 4 of his guard ran up the path towards the edge of the cliff. Fionna was in the bloody stalking lion's sights when Rovash arrived. He came full-on, leaping through the air, with his 2-handed blade flashing. With both hands on his deadly weapon's grip, he bore down hard into the hairy back of the beast. The blow cut through its neck and shoulder with a gush of fresh blood. The guards, who were hot on his heels, shot arrows and continued to shoot more into it, but the massive beast would not be put down. Fionna had managed to get to her feet and crack it across the face with her staff. The lion flinched and lashed out at her. A claw tore into her leg, causing her to cry out in pain. Aeglum twisted painfully as he hit something solid. He lost his grip on one of his swords. It clattered down the cliffside into the trees far below. He shaded his eyes with his free hand as he peered into the light that surrounded him. EJ's fall was stopped abruptly by the thin trunk of a young sapling tree. It happened to be growing in just the right spot on the side of a tiny outcropping where he lay. The fall had knocked the wind right out of him, stunning him for a moment. Sounds of Fionna and the lion far above shook him back into action. Clenching his last sword in his teeth, he struggled to climb the steep cliff wall back to the top. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Fiona's eyes flashed with anger and stubborn determination as she faced down the lion. She was standing her ground with only her staff to shield her. Growling under her breath, she hit it hard again. Rovash launched himself across the front of the animal to attack its eyes and distract it from mauling her. Its mighty paw opened with talon-like claws, swiping at him in mid-air. The big man was knocked down to the ground like a rag doll. The smell of blood drove the beast to frenzy as it pounced on his prone body. Horrifying sounds of Rovash's muffled screams paralyzed Fionna as the giant cat clenched him in its claws and ground him in its jaws. Fiona's high-pitched scream rose up out of the ground and exploded from her lungs in a wave of shock. She watched the lion tear up the helpless Rovash in its grip. Suddenly, as if propelled by godly force, Ijlum appeared, leaping past her at great speed. His single blade plunged deep between the ribs of the beast until it reached the heart. The lion stood up from its meal, as if to look at him in surprise. It made a last growling gasp as it fell over, dead. Fionna ran to Rovash. He was unconscious, barely alive. The side of his face was severely clawed open just above the left eye. His ribs were crushed, an arm and leg were broken, and the full extent of the damage was yet unseen, as his body lay in an unnatural heap. Fionna frantically reached to stop the draining arteries from bleeding out, but he was going fast. "Oh gods, oh gods, oh gods, no! Ijlum!" Fionna cried out. The slippery flow of blood was on her hands, seeping into the ground, surrounding her, as she tried to apply pressure to the wounds. "This is your brother! Rovash! Ijlum, help me!" Fionna screamed. EJ was shocked at the sight of so much blood mingling everywhere. His ears were still ringing as he heard his Fionna call him to aid. EJ knelt and placed his hands where Fionna was holding the flood back. The shouting men and outside noises faded back into an ethereal haze, and there was only the three of them, and the sound of a heartbeat pumping to a stop. Ijlum turned sharply towards her. "Hear me, Fionna." The whisper of his voice pierced through the waves of panic crashing inside her head. Brightness filled in all around them. Ijlum's sorrow-filled eyes were determined, and she somehow knew what had to be done. A brilliant light surrounded her as she concentrated her magics on holding the blood still. The glow came from everywhere and nowhere. Ro's last thoughts lingered and echoed strangely in the thickened, chilly air. "So, it is you, little brother. I thought I saw your golden hair fly off the cliff." Time pulsed with the irregular sound of a heartbeat as darkness pressed in all around the edges. The sensation of suffocation clutched at his throat and his chest. Ro wanted to choke to clear his lungs, but he could not move. He felt no fear as he let his body go still in this place. He was lying down in a pale glow, with no walls or corners that could be seen. "Where am I?" He somehow spoke with no breath. "You are here with us, brother," Ijlum said with his silvery voice, calm and soothing. "Oh," Ro said, as if that was answer enough. The room felt surreal for a moment as the place shifted like churning waves on sand. Rovash felt weightless and drifting in irresistible darkness, and then it all shifted into bright light again. "I'm dying then," Rovash felt tired and wanted to go to sleep. But he kept hearing his brother's voice. The room shook as dark, shimmering black flakes lingered on the edges of the light. Rovash closed his eyes against it, feeling nauseous. "Not unless you wish it," Ejlum's persistent, soothing voice resonated. It seemed too far away. "I would think you would like to embrace your newfound brother before you go. After waiting so long." Ejlum breathed the words directly into him. "Yes," Rovash said, focusing on that one desire. "Please grant me one thing, Ninhan." Rovash knew blissfully in his heart that he had been forgiven for their past. As he asked, "Leave a scar on my face so I may see in my mirror every day how much I truly love my little brother." "As you wish," his younger brother's voice made him smile. Tears flowed out of his eyes, down both sides of his cheeks, draining wet over his ears. He could feel his lungs fill with breath again, and the searing pain of it overwhelmed him. "He is going to stay," Ejlum announced to the worried men who were gathered around their fallen commander. "The bleeding has stopped," he mumbled with an exhausted sigh, as he looked to Fionna to see how she was doing. She was still kneeling, paralyzed, with her hands holding where the blood had previously gushed. Ro's bones had moved back to normal. His wounds, though still oozing, were partly knit closed, and he was breathing. Ejlum knew the common tongue just well enough to get his orders across. "He needs time. Take him ever so gently." Ejlum urged the men who had fashioned a stretcher to carry his brother's body. The men seemed to understand and continued their work to move them all to safety. EJ pulled Fionna up into his arms. They were drenched in crusted, drying blood. Fionna broke down in sobs against his chest. The men kept watching the brush, wary of dangerous scavengers that may come with the smell of fresh blood. They walked back to the fort slowly. "So, this is where you've been," EJ said soberly. "And you found my brother for me." "Yes. I had not yet persuaded him to return with me to see you. He was afraid you would not forgive him. He blames himself for what happened to you that day." She paused, looking strangely at her hands and forearms, covered in rose blood. "He has spent his whole life looking for you," she mumbled almost incoherently. Her perception lingered surreal as they moved forward towards the fort. To be so afraid when the path was made clear," EJ said. "I will never let him forget this one." "EJ," Fionna cringed. "What are you saying?" "Only as brothers know, Fionna. It's okay to be fierce or happy with each other. It is expected." He looked serious in his weariness. "I have no idea what you just said to me." Fionna shook her head, utterly confused. "I'm sure I will figure it out someday." She threw her hands up and then found herself leaning over to pick up her staff that had slipped out of her grip. They continued the slow procession, stumbling and exhausted. Once inside the safety of the compound, Fionna felt more than just a little lightheaded. She found herself leaning on her staff, as if her life depended on it. Fionna's eyes narrowed as she focused onto her legging that was soaked and dripping with fresh blood. She saw EJ glance over at her. Smiling at first, he got a blurred look on his face. Her eyes went dim and rolled up as she slumped down towards the ground. Ejlum quickly caught her in his arms, just as she collapsed. I wonder if Fionna could hear the gulls all the way past Velhavar to the western shores. Is it really a surprise? Or did you know that EJ and Fionna would get together someday? And here we are again, where precious life hangs in the balance. You'll have to come back next week to find out if they're gonna make it. 'Cause I won't tell. No way. Elvish Lesson of the Day. In the Elvish language, as invented by Tolkien, the word wen is often added to the end of female names because it means female, like Rhianwen or Arwen. The word Gwenig means female partner or wife, not to be confused with Gwynnig, which literally means infant, because a Gwyn is a baby, where a Gwen is a wife. But wait, that's not the whole word you say. You said Gwenig. Well, that last part is a term of endearment that adds a sweetness from the heart that would only be spoken between lovers. But what if I'm a guy, you might ask? The word ben means male, so a benig would be your male companion that is dear to your heart. So don't take what you've learned today and throw it around just willy-nilly, unless you really mean it.